Welcome everybody to the second part of the WILF US sponsored event. 50 years is enough time to challenge corporate power. I'm Mary Beth Gardam with Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, our Women, Money, and Democracy Committee, formerly the Corporations versus Democracy Committee. We're so glad you're here. Helping with the chat tonight is Ricky Gard Diamond from Vermont. Her book, Screwnomics, How Our Economy Works Against Women and Real Ways to Make Lasting Change, and founder of the organization called An Economy of Our Own, which is a partner of WILF's. Our technical assistants tonight are Ellen Schwartz in Sacramento, Ellen Thomas in the mountains of North Carolina. Thanks to both of them. And we're glad that Lisa Graves of Bold Rethink and Center for Media and Democracy is hanging in there to participate in this segment too. Our committee, Women, Money, and Democracy, works on many economic justice issues, and I hope you'll take time to look at our webpage. We meet every third Tuesday of each month by Zoom. All WILF members are invited to join. If you're not yet a WILF member, go to our website and join, and then check out our work. We could use your help. We're doing lots of great work, but we could do more if we had more folks. WILF is the oldest international women's peace organization in the world, founded in 1915 by Jane Addams, and international women trying to stop World War I. When you join the US section for just $35 a year, you connect with and support the work of peace women across the planet and across the United States. If you haven't already put your name in the chat, please do so. For now, we'll ask everyone to remain muted, and we'll be using the chats for reference and comments. So just know that you can save the chat at the end. You don't have to worry about making notes. Tonight, we are privileged to welcome Virginia Rasmussen, Jan Edwards, Jim and Tommy Allison. We are delighted to have them back with us and united to mark both the 50th anniversary of the PAL Manifesto and a renewed effort by our committee to dust off the powerful tools they created for WILF, which are still unfortunately needed, and invest in the kind of old-fashioned person-to-person activism that can re-energize our democratic institutions and reclaim our democracy. With Mary Zepernick and Molly Morgan, neither of whom could join us tonight, these folks were the researchers, authors, and tireless advocates for tools that WILF originated and which have been used and honored by many of our ally organizations. You'll also meet one of our longtime allies, Caitlin from Move to Amend. These tools, the corporate study course, Challenge Corporate Power, Assert the People's Rights, and the timeline of corporate constitutional rights are still on our committee's webpage. They are still relevant. And after watching the film, The New Corporation, we can see that the need for these kinds of outreach and educational tools is greater than it ever has been. There are excellent ways to reach out to your community to inform and organize the public. I can tell you that in the Des Moines branch of WILF, between 2003 and 2007, we hosted probably 4 to 6 small group discussions a year. And they had about 8 to 10 people in each group. We enrolled about 240 folks in the small group discussions over that time period. And in 2005, we held a one-day conference that captured all the folks we'd invited in previous years who said they just couldn't make that long of a commitment. And we held a one-day conference that captured all of those people and instead offered them a one-day program that included breakfast and lunch, was held at the United Congregational Church, with speakers on each of the chapters of the course and several tracks going at once. That one day we engaged and informed another 200 people. The course brought our branch many new members over the years who still stand with us. They became first angered by what they learned and then motivated to work for change. The fact that these outreach sessions were offered in Iowa the site of the presidential election caucuses, and we had educated and engaged over 400 activists in town, was doubly important and resulted in important questions to presidential candidates about how they would address corporate capture of our courts and agencies, our democracy. And Des Moines was only one city where we pushed out these important sessions. Overall, thousands of Americans interacted with the course. The timeline for corporate constitutional rights, one might say stolen constitutional rights, has been used by educators, organizers, and activists to point out the intentional pattern of corporate capture of our highest court from the 1880s onwards. And it's a documentation of the strategy and relentless corruption that has shredded our democracy over the years, handing power and rights over to corporations that were originally intended only for human persons. So in addition to that, Jim Allison's plays about corporate power and abuse of power, corruption at the Supreme Court, employed creative efforts to use art, drama, and humor to entertain while we educate. The plays are easy to mount and retain all their power and engage the public. They are in the Creative Commons, and they are also on our webpage. So the work Wolf undertook in the late 90s and early 2000s didn't just happen. I wonder if any of our panelists could talk about your inspiration for this work based on your prior work with POCLAD, the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy. I'm really interested to hear about those brilliant men, Richard Grossman and Ward Morehouse. We're putting some biological information into the chat on those two giants of pro-democracy work. Did you all know them? How did you meet them? What were they like? Did they inform your work? Your mics are unmuted, so just dive right in. Virginia, would you like to start?
I will. I'm here. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Well, that's great because I can't see you. My computer systems are flawed and I am not very good at solving the problems, but I'm glad at least we can hear one another.
Yes.
Yes, with regard to Richard and Ward, and Richard was the first one we met on the Cape, and by we, I mean initially Mary Zepernick and myself. I really don't know how that happened, but somewhere we met him, had a conversation, and we were off and running, which was so satisfying because certainly I was exhausted with normal activism. And I know many folks in WILP were as well. You know, work, 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 march, write letters, organize protests, and things only worsened. And the power of corporations to define what was happening in government, in our lives and workplaces continued to become stronger, more powerful. So it was such a joy to encounter someone like Richard, whose main work was very much about corporations. He had done a lot of study and a lot of writing. And his view, of course, was that corporations must be put subordinate to the people. That the idea of running after them and cajoling them and insisting that they do something differently is not going to happen as long as they have the legal power of personhood. And so the whole initial work of the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy was to, you know, understand how that degree of corporate power was attained, and therefore how we need to move and the steps we need to take to put them subordinate to we the people. And it was an exciting time. And of course, as we know, Wilk then took over, joined some of that work with its Corporations and Democracy Committee, its materials, its educational materials, and so forth. And I think we did some good work. And POCLAD has most certainly produced some, I think, very engaging and incisive analysis that would serve us well to pay more attention to. Move to Amend, of course, is doing that and trying to move the whole notion of putting corporations subordinate and making democracy real out into political and activist life. But it's tough going, and if you just look at the news and read the papers, you keep feeling that, guess what, we're losing ground. I agree with the comments that the speaker had made. Things just keep getting worse and worse, and more ominous and more ominous. And so it's a challenge, to say the least, and I find rather discouraging. What I do not think, what's his name, our speaker tonight, Bakken, spoke enough about was this business of taking corporate constitutional rights away from them. What are they doing with those? Obviously, we will be always on the losing end of things, on the lesser political power of things, as long as they have constitutional rights. We know they didn't always have them. That was not the intent of the founders. They're not mentioned in the Constitution, but still, we do not incorporate into our political work the need to take away that illegitimate right that they have. So I would just throw that out as a way of a little bit of background about our early work and the main focus of it in terms of where we feel the reframing of our activism needs to go.
How did you decide on the study course itself? How did you go about assembling and prioritizing the articles you included? Who did the writing of the chapters, and who were the curriculum experts who designed the discussion questions? How did it all come together?
Well, I'll take a bit of comment. I'll make a bit of comment on that, and others will as well. We did it, of course, through primarily through meetings that we had. We traveled a good bit to have smaller meetings, not just the national conferences of Wilk. We spent a lot of time on the phone. We had lots of conference calls on the phone. And slowly wrote materials and built an agenda for communicating in a logical way the materials to other people whom they would make sense, and offered ways of seeing and critiquing the corporate lives we live. And we did it, I'd say, one chapter at a time and one meeting at a time, and with some people who were pretty good writers and editors. We put together a product.
Yes, you did, and it's an excellent product. It's held up against time. Jan, do you want to comment on this?
Sure. I actually was not involved in the early writing of those study materials, I don't think. My mind's not that great. But Molly was. Molly was very involved in that. I guess I will say that I got involved with this issue through another organization called the Alliance for Democracy, which was very active in my area, which was Northern California at the time. They had a very active branch. And through that, I heard about these issues and I got introduced to the POCLAD philosophies and thinking. And I started my own form of my own branch or chapter of the Alliance for Democracy in the late 90s or something. And we zeroed in on corporate personhood. And what I was interested in was trying to do a little in our tiny town, see if we could vote out corporate personhood. But what happened was that the city attorney said, you cannot put on a ballot. You can't take away the rights of a person by ballot. He wouldn't put it on a ballot. So then the next thing we did was we tried to get the city council to abolish corporate personhood, and they were scared to death. But they did pass the first resolution anywhere in the country on abolishing corporate personhood. And that was pretty neat. And well, I mean, we thought it was pretty neat at the time and we crowed about it and everything. And POCLAD helped a lot with that. And I have to do a shout out to the amazing Jane Ann Morris, who had died in the last few years, but she's really, really amazing. I don't know if you guys can still hear me because everyone's frozen, it looks like on the TV, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, but anyway, Jane Ann really was a brilliant help to me, as well as Richard. And anyway, I began to need to be able to talk about this issue, and it was really hard to figure out how to get at it. And that's how the timeline came to be, because I started putting things out so that I could just quickly, point to it and things like that. And then I tried to get other little, either easy little soundbitey things, and hence our kind of well-known slogan and t-shirt that we'll put out. This was actually a slogan that my husband made up, Bill Myers. He said it to me one day because he was trying to help me understand what legal fiction was, what a legal fiction was, because I didn't really know very much about it at that point. And I just thought it was catchy, and we ended up using it as our t-shirt. So in preparation for today, I found that I had these giant binders still on how all the things we did. And I was just amazed at all the work we did, not only on corporate personhood, but then how we kind of morphed into rights-based organizing and trying to, I don't know, kind of like to help activist groups begin to think of things instead of being in a harm-based complaint, but to a right-based demand. Wouldn't you say that's kind of what we were doing, Virginia?
I would.
And
well said.
And I also want to say Caitlin was there too. She was in the group too, as well as many other people. But she's on the, but yeah, she didn't come in later. She was right there. And I think when I joined WILF was at 9/11, Caitlin and I and a bunch of other activists and some people from POCLAD too, Karen Coulter, and can't even remember who all was there, but we were all together in a retreat when the planes hit the towers. And after a lot of shock and grief, we realized that a lot of the activist energy was not going to be able to focus on corporate power at that moment, that it was going to be drained off in, and rightly so, in anti-war activities and all kinds of stuff. So at that point, Molly Morgan, who was also at the retreat, just said, why don't you all come into WILF and we'll have a little place where we can, you know, a little think tank for this, and until such time as it's ready to move on. That's how I remember it. And then we started working in earnest in the Abolish Corporate Personhood campaign, which here is our bumper sticker from the Wolf campaign.
Still have several of those.
I see.
Molly and you, Jan, toured the timeline across the country during those early years. You made several videos about the information and documentation of those cases, and people love that. They're still asking for those DVDs that showed
Oh,
the
dear.
Jan and Molly show.
Dog and pony shoe.
What was that kind of really energetic proselytizing like back then? Did you feel like the high priestesses of challenging corporate power, or what kinds of reactions were you getting on the road?
Oh, we got great reaction, I guess, but I have to say for myself, it was almost like a fever. I don't really know why, but it grabbed me. I really, really believed, more so than I do now, that this was the key to everything. That if people could just see, you know, it'd be like the curtains would open and they'd see Oz, you know, working the lights. And I just, I guess maybe people were not that impressed or that surprised by it all. But I thought I had been so surprised when I learned all that analysis about corporate constitutional rights, and also just the concept that it was a plan, that the system is working exactly as it's planned. That this isn't
It's not broken at all.
You know, I was just like, no, these things, you know, if only people knew. But now I see, I don't know what I see. I shouldn't get down on it, but I began to feel like this was not the silver bullet I had once hoped it would be, or that people would just be, you know. So it was a longer haul.
Amazing how logic doesn't always convince people.
Well, they had their own luck.
How do you think that the timeline would be received today? You know, when we consider, how might we consider using it in like more social media kinds of ways, or to make it more immediate and compelling? And
well, Caitlin could say something about that. My original feeling was that it was that, well, for one thing, I didn't want to get into the PowerPoint stuff and all that because there were always glitches, and I didn't feel like I was going to be able to handle it. But I thought people liked it. Was kind of cool to see it stretched out across a long wall. It gave you the feeling of time and space. But I know that Caitlin probably has had a lot of thoughts about how to present information more excitingly to the.
what do you think, Caitlin?
Well, first of all, I still use your timeline, Jan, in almost every presentation I can, as long as they'll give me a long enough wall.
Exactly.
So I think there's actually a lot of value to see it like that. And we have done it in different ways. We actually developed an exercise that we do with 3 different timelines, and actually people in the audience kind of coming up and each, you know, reading a case, and then we layer on top of, so basically we do, you know, Jan's framework of, you know, the rights for corporations that they gain through Supreme Court decisions, the rights that people have gained through mostly constitutional amendments, and then also another piece, which is the legal framework that has created white supremacy, and also how that has changed over time. And those 3 pieces of, you know, our history of the colonization of people on the part of a small number of people, that is the history of this country. And we found that's really powerful. You know, people reading the cases themselves. I'll do a little hunting on the Move to Amend site to find where that exercise is. But, you know, we took all of Jan's work to use that. And I think there are ways that it could be also, like you said, put into social media. But I also think it's very powerful. We kind of we tried some ways to sort of take the pieces one at a time, but that's not as potent as kind of like the whole thing, which can be, you know, overwhelming in a way. You know, I've definitely had people say like, you know, I wasn't prepared for this onslaught to see it. But, you know, I mean, that's reality. And that's part of the whole work, is to get people to really grapple and take in how far away from any kind of democratic power we have now or have ever meaningfully had in this country.
Margaret Coster has written, every time I have the opportunity, I put my long version of the timeline up. Without fail, at least one person studies it at length. Its reach may not be broad, but it is deep. It gives people a real aha experience. I think it does. I think it still does. It's still very powerful.
You know, if I could say one thing about the timeline was I did take it several times to the Lawyers Guild, the National Lawyers Guild, and did presentations at their conferences. 2 or 3 times we did that. And the first time that I did that, I was terrified because I thought, oh my gosh, this is a room of lawyers. They're just gonna, but they didn't tear it apart. In fact, they were like, oh, you know, it was really, they knew the cases, and the cases also represent other things besides this. But anyway, it was very empowering to know that it was accepted even by actual people who actually have law degrees as something valid, a valid interpretation. So
yeah, I think these tools are still really, really valuable. And after watching that movie, I mean, don't you feel like we're impelled to brush them off and get them out there again? I mean, my goodness. I feel really privileged to have been a very small part of Jim Allison's creative path when he created those plays. Jim wrote a 30-page research paper about the Santa Clara decision, and it was a really wonderful paper. But I worried that, you know, 30 pages, who's going to read this? And he had such great, unforgettable characters in it. They were just bigger than life. And he said, you know, maybe there's another way to package this. Jim, can you talk a little bit about what that paper was based on, and then what happened after you talked to me about it?
Sure. It was all your fault, Mary Beth. This is the story behind that play. Tommy and I, when she stopped being mayor, we had a lot of time on our hands, so we rejoined the local WILF group, and they happened to be engaged with a study guide at that time about corporate power. And boy, did we learn a lot from that. And we got interested in this whole fraudulent decision, you know, the Santa Clara v. Southern Pacific decision, and how they try to jimmy their way into corporate personhood by that very fraudulent way. It's one of the bleakest, darkest spots in the history of this entire Supreme Court. We got interested in that, so we had to have some friends who lived in Georgetown, and they offered to put us up for a few days in their home, and we spent 3 days in Washington, going through the Library of Congress, through the archives of the Chief Justice at the time, Morrison Waite, and examining his papers as they surrounded that period of time, that decision, 1886 decision. And that's where we got all those notes that we put into that 30-page paper. And you rightly said, after we sent it to you, nobody's going to read this. It's great, but nobody's going to read it. Why don't you make it into a play? Which was like a bolt of lightning. I never even thought of such a thing. It all came from you, Mary Beth, really. So I got to thinking about it. I said, well, I never written a play. I might as well try. So I did. And I sent the result. I sent a script to Mary Beth, and she right away sent back saying, yeah, it's good. It needs some changes. You need some editing, but it's really good. Why don't you come up here to Iowa? I think it was Cedar Rapids, was it not, at the time? And we'll put it on as sort of dinner theater. There's a place we can do this, and I'll get the actors together, and I'll do some producing, and I'll put it together for you. So Tommy and I jumped into our Prius and went up to Cedar Rapids, and we did it. The actors were great. We had a couple of rehearsals. They were very quick studies. And the audience was, I was just floored by the audience reaction. I just never expected anything so enthusiastic and so welcoming and so open as I saw that night. I still get chills thinking about it. You know, that was a wonderful evening. And it started us off on a bunch of plays besides that one. But that one we produced here and there and elsewhere. We did it at a WILF convention, and we did it here in Bloomington a couple of times, and people picked it up.
The prosecution of Judge Waite, right?
The prosecution of Judge Waite, and it was a big hit everywhere we went with it. Polished Productions, Crude Productions, everything. And so I was encouraged to write some more. So I did write some more. I wrote one about the Powell memo called Mr. Powell Writes a Memo. That was produced here in Bloomington, and a few others. We did it once in Madison, Wisconsin. And after the play, I was sitting in a plenary session, and up the aisle comes a lady, a complete stranger, and she leaned over. Apparently, she had seen the play in Madison the previous night. She said, "You know, Mr. Allen, you should write a play about Dodge v. Ford." I said, "You know, I happen to know something about Dodge v. Ford. It's on your timeline, Jan. You know what it is." And I said, "You're right. You know, that deserves a play." And I when I got home, I wrote a play, and I wrote a play about that too. So they can just keep coming along. The latest play I've written is about redistricting and gerrymandering. It's called Waiting for Bappo. It's a reference to the redistricting maps that they're going to draw, you know, and gerrymander them all over again. And Bappo is the guy who's in charge of the maps, you know, and he never shows up, you know, like Gatto, you know, he never quite shows up. But it's all about him and his maps.
They're so clever. They use humor so well.
Well, I've had a great time doing it, and I hope some of you may have seen it would agree with me. It was worth doing.
But the key here is in what you're talking about. How do you get these ideas across? And the human part of it, you know, going to the original source, and you see how much that these judges, these Supreme Court judges, were being bribed in effect by free passes on the railroads for their whole families. And I mean, with whole railroad cars for weeks at a time going cross country, you begin to get this human touch, and not just a sort of a logical objection to something, but you begin to see these are fellow humans doing these things to us, and it comes home to people.
It's the Chief Justice and his daughter who are taking this trip across the United States.
But this brings it alive. It brings it, you know, we sort of look at our neighbors and say, are they getting more than we are? Are they doing better than us? Or this, it brings it to the
timeline. There it is.
That is such a great creation.
We still have it. We have the timeline. We use the timeline.
Yeah.
And when we put it up, people go up there and they just study it all along the line.
I wouldn't change it.
Caitlin, where was that? I recognize the blue tape.
They always use blue tape.
Is that in San Francisco?
Might have been the
I
democracy.
think that's my friend Juliana.
15 years ago.
It might have been the Democracy Convention as well.
Could have been in Madison, one of those conventions,
No,
So I just wanted to say that those plays that Jim's talking about are all on our webpage, Women, Money, and Democracy. You can get them there, and they are still really, really amusing and entertaining and educational. Easy to mount. You don't have to have people memorize them. We did a reader's play. The actors just read their parts, and it was very effective.
And the Morrison play you can still see on YouTube.
That's right.
Yeah.
So do any of our Zoom participants have questions for the panel? Now's the time
to tell what's happening now. Caitlin should tell what's happening now.
With our committee, you mean?
Well, with the issue in Congress.
issue in the Congress. Yeah, Caitlin, yes.
Yes.
I wanted to introduce Caitlin. Back when we launched these tools, the feedback we were getting was that they did inform people of the facts which had been hidden in plain view. And they crystallized this pattern of corporate abuse, this taking of constitutional rights. But they made people angry, and they made people want to do something about it. But, 20 years ago, there weren't very many things they could do. That was one of the criticisms and feedback that we constantly got. What can we do about it? Well, today, nearly 20 years on, there's a whole host of allies doing amazing work that strengthens both economic equity and advocates for substantive change. I want to introduce Caitlin Saposi-Belknap of Move to Amend. Caitlin was part of POCLAD in the early years. You heard about that. What got you involved with Move to Amend, and how has your organization taken the WILF tools and used them to move people forward towards action? What are you doing these days, Caitlin?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Mary Beth. And it's really nice to see you again, Jan. And I'm sorry I can't see you, Virginia and Lisa. Well, first of all, WILF was part of Move to Amend when we formed Move to Amend. It was a coalition of organizations that all kind of came together, basically looking at the Citizens United decision that was coming. And we said, is now a good time for us to actually all join forces on a campaign together? And we really expected it to be, just kind of a continuation of the education. And maybe if we were lucky, we would be able to reframe it from the campaign finance issue that we knew was going to be the crux of the way it was talked about, to these deeper issues of democracy and corporate power and corporate personhood or corporate constitutional rights. But we were just, kind of in the right place at the right time, and all of the seeds that had been planted. It actually is 20 years. It's 20 years ago this month that I moved to California and started working with Democracy Unlimited. And I see Paul's name on this call with Paul. It was in July, sometime in early July. And it was 20 years ago in September, Jan, that we met for that retreat that you were talking about in Placerville, near where I am now in Sacramento. So we had been, and others before I even came onto the scene, of course, I've been working on this, POCLAD and others kind of in that orbit. So those seeds really, helped, I think, spark a different response to Citizens United than what we actually expected. And we were also in the right place at the right time, in the sense that, like, the Washington, D.C. organizations that oftentimes come at all these issues in a very incrementalist and kind of like what's possible with whatever Congress that we have now, and that's the most that we will ever envision. We were out in front of them, and we were saying that the solution is a constitutional amendment. Not that we had written it, not that we knew what it would say, and in fact, it included some other points originally that we ended up having to let go because it was too complex. A right to vote, which we still need in the Constitution, and also the right for local communities to decide for themselves there's issues of like their health, their safety, their resources, and not to have corporations be able to go to state legislatures or the federal government and preempt their authority, which that one is, I'm not even sure how to put that into this Constitution that we have. And I have come to believe that we need an entirely different Constitution. But when we started Move to Amend, I think a lot of us also thought that, but it was like inconceivable to even be talking about an amendment. So, that was, I think it was like 13 years ago that we had that meeting. I've lost track a little bit. And so long story short, and many of the people on this call, you are part of Move to Amend. I see so many names I recognize. So I'm somewhat maybe here we're just taking a moment to revel in where we are now and think about where we should go next. But just in case anybody doesn't know, so Move to Amend wrote the We the People amendment. We actually wrote it, as I mentioned to Mary Beth, reminding that we were in Lisa's house, because Lisa used to be on the national team for Move to Amend, at a retreat, because that's how we had to do all these retreats in our own homes and just scrapping together. We wrote it right as Occupy was kind of becoming clear that it wasn't going to be, just another blip. It was going to be something significant. And we were in Madison, Wisconsin. So, and we didn't even really think at that time that it was probably very realistic to find anybody in Congress who would even introduce the thing, as it was. But it has been introduced in Congress. It's been introduced 4 times. So it's in the current Congress. It's been introduced every time. Originally we had 3 co-sponsors. Now we're up to 68. And we continue to do the work to, move it forward in Congress. But a lot of what Move to Amend is still focused on is the movement building and the education work that, WILF and POCLAD and Democracy Unlimited and the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund and Alliance for Democracy, we're doing before, because we're, at the end of the day, the issue, as I think the old corporation film and the new corporation film spells out so well, and what's so valuable is showing that it's the system, and the problem is that we don't have democracy. And I think in some ways our movement actually needs to take responsibility for, at this point, the way we have come at this, talking about the founding fathers, talking about how they never intended corporations to have so much power. That's all true. But the reality is that they also never intended for us to have a democracy. And I know that, that's POCLAD and WILF, that we have talked about that, we include that. But in the interest of sort of popularizing this message, sometimes we leave that part out, and we wrap ourselves in the flag. And what I really was struck by watching the new corporation is that corporate rule is the project of colonialism. It has been that all along. I mean, I was blown away. I knew Bill Gates was a bad guy, but I did not. For those of you who saw the film, and if those of you who haven't, you should watch it. It's not, it's not going to make you feel great about our prospects, but that's part of what we need to do with being people alive right now, is take in for all the way, what we're up against. And, just what's happening in Africa, where they're privatizing the education system with, basically computers and, people that are just there to walk around with a tablet, and then making money off of Africa, which, the colonial project already took almost everything from Africa. And now they're going to go back in for another round. And that's what's happening all over the world. And that's what corporate capitalism is about. And the antidote to that is democracy. And so I think that we're at the point now where it doesn't behoove us to kind of bring people into this reality in a soft, gentle way, because with climate collapse, there's no room for any more soft and gentle and sort of incremental, and maybe we'll do it slowly. That's not an option. So we actually need to lay bare the real deal and what has been going on, and how our struggle, democracy. I mean, the other thing too is while Joel was talking, I think he's absolutely right. But, your regular person, and especially your younger person, or even using the word citizen when so many people in this country don't even have citizenship status, it's we need to help people understand that what has been happening to us and what this is all part of, and the exploitation that is happening to all of us, although to different degrees, and that the people who are in power, including just about every single person in Congress, even people who we would call progressives, are not up for actually changing it in a systemic way. And we need to name that. And so to circle back to Move to Amend, I mean, yes, we have 68 co-sponsors, and that is profound considering what it is we're proposing, which is, a radical overhaul of the way that property is exalted in our foundational law. And the reality is most of those people in Congress don't even really understand what they've signed on to. They do it because we have pressured them and made them feel like they have to. But if it were time for a vote tomorrow, I don't think we would have most of them with us. And so the other message that I just wanted to share in terms of what I've been thinking about is we really have to deal with the fact that the Democratic Party is not invested in revolutionary democratic change at all. And if we are going to be electing people to office, again, tying it back to the corporation film, I think, I served in elected office at the local level for 12 years. I do really believe in that. And I'm so glad that what they emphasized was these local politicians, because at the moment, there is nobody in Congress who really actually understands what the role of somebody who is an agitator should be in Congress. It should be to disrupt everything they're doing and expose. We don't have any kind of power to leverage. And until we build it, the goal of our elected officials who make it in should be to expose and disrupt. And that's kind of all we can do. And I think that our movement here and our larger movement as well, sometimes we get caught up in like kind of acting like we have more power than we do, and deluding ourselves. And then therefore people who come to us and then they sort of see like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. We're not getting anywhere. It's like, no, we're not getting anywhere because the corporate capitalists are in charge of everything. And so, all we can do right now is expose and disrupt and then continue to build the power. But we shouldn't act like we have more power than we do, because the danger of that is that it leads to co-optation. And I think we've seen that some of our national progressives in power are either already co-opted or just about to be. And then that doesn't really serve us. So that was a lot, but I really appreciate kind of this retrospect, and then also opportunity to be with these allies who have been working on this for so long, all of us, and to talk about, what we do from here. Because the movie really did show that, we've been working so hard, and yet on all fronts, we've lost ground. And so rather than throwing our hands up, the question is, okay, well, then what do we do with that? What does that mean that we do? How do we change what we have been doing to be more effective? Because giving up is absolutely not an option.
You have a little bit of pushback from people who want to know if you don't believe that AOC is doing her bit to disrupt and create change.
Well, AOC is not a co-sponsor of the We the People Amendment. I would say that should be like a #1 litmus test. She has been in the past, but she hasn't signed on this time. She certainly hasn't prioritized talking about corporate constitutional rights or democracy in the way that we talk about it. So I think, unfortunately, what ends up happening is it becomes sort of like a spectacle. So I'm not here to say, that I think that AOC has sold out. That's not helpful, and I don't think that I don't know, but I do think that capitulating to party leadership and not being willing to force votes in an uncomfortable way. It's like at this point we have enough people in the progressive caucus that they should be able to block forward progress and make demands of the leadership of the Democratic Party. And yet we haven't seen them do that at all. And then even if you want to take a smaller number and just look to the so-called squad, there have been some key votes where there could have been a leveraging and a demand around, for example, Pelosi continuing on as the speaker. And there was a push to try and get them to use that opportunity to push Medicare for all in a more forceful way, which would, fundamentally improve and affect so many people's lives. And we have made so much progress on it. I mean, like, for example, the film talked about $15 minimum wage and all of the local work that has been done. And now we're at the point that we have somebody in the presidency who supposedly supports a $15 minimum wage, and somehow or other the political party that he belongs to backs away from that demand right as we should be winning it. And we all know that 15 isn't even enough at all to keep somebody out of poverty, right? So it's like, we do have to take a really hard look and say, if they're on our side, what's the plan to move our agenda forward? And what are they actually doing to do that? And I think that that's a very reasonable question. We're the ones who got all of those folks there. What's going to happen with all the money that we spent on that Bernie Sanders campaign? Like, what do we have to show for it?
So thank you, Caitlin. That was
So
a
well
lot.
said.
Very well said. I think a lot of people felt during the whole Trump years, and some still feel, that it's so dangerous to open up the Constitution to the idea of changing it now, when there are these, there are crazy people who are just saying, rubbing their hand, all right, let me get at it. God knows what they'll do with the few little freedoms that we have left. So I think that may be part of the hesitation, at least for the last 4 years, why things have been slow. Maybe if we all get behind the We the People amendment, we'll see some traction. I hope this call stirs that reaction in folks. There are a lot of other organizations that our committee's been working with and supporting and endorsing. One is representus.com, which works on a state-by-state effort to pass anti-corruption laws. The Alliance for Democracy that I think Jan mentioned, which is, our own Nancy Price helps lead that organization, and they do a great job working on voter rights and election protection issues. They have a wonderful magazine that comes out regularly called Justice Rising, really good. Ricky Ott's Ultimate Civics organization offers brilliant curriculums on corporate power and their effect on democracy to school kids in middle and high school classrooms. And the Organized Crime, Corruption, and Reporting Project, OCCRP, reports on the kinds of international corruption like the Panama Papers and does really courageous work reporting on corporate fraud cases, many that include politicians across the globe, even some US officials as well. We're also supporting a new organization called Bold Rethink, which Lisa Graves is part of. Lisa, can you briefly describe the work of Bold Rethink?
Oh gosh, thanks, Mary Beth. It's a new sort of coalition effort. It was originally launched last year to respond to the Powell memo, with the anniversary coming up, different ways to push back on it. And we're just getting some of that work started. We have a number of groups that are participating, and you can learn more at boldrethink.org or at Facebook. We're doing some conversations with some folks around the country about the Powell memo, like Nancy McLean and others, and the impact of that memo as one of the mechanisms for driving these corporate rights forward and the impact of them. So that's very nice of you to ask me, Mary Beth. It's actually just been an honor to be here for this conversation and hear all this fine work that's been happening and the roots of it and its ongoing work, and always to see and hear from Caitlin and her warrior spirit to really bring these fights forward and not let up. I'm just glad to be able to be with you tonight and be inspired by so many of the things that people have said.
Honestly, this issue is what got me into WELF. It's the issue that continues to fuel my activism. I don't know if changing it will change everything, but I can't see it's moving forward without this kind of substantive change. Our community is also actively supporting feminist economic literacy through a partnership with An Economy of Our Own. We're invested with An Economy of Our Own because we want to lift up the voices of young women of color, women in finance who are working on really important economic solutions. We're co-sponsoring workshops at the WELF Triennial Congress next month and the National NOW Conference, the National Organization of Women, at the end of July. And we're promoting advocacy training for folks who want to understand more and advocate for public banking initiatives across the country. Public banking is a great way to protect cities and states and the homeowners and young people who have student loans and economically disadvantaged families from the risky business the Wall Street bully boys inflict on Americans, the criminal actions that they take against ordinary people. Families all across the United States are still struggling to recover from the crash of 2008, and public banking initiatives can help insulate communities from that kind of trauma, loss, and devastation. And we're launching a public banking learning circle for women activists starting on starting on Friday, August 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern. Women who want to advocate more effectively for public banking or learning about it can join this learning circle led by actual public banking expert organizers. We'll have a registration link on our webpage very soon, but for now, you can block out the time, Friday, August 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern, and help us spread the word. Our committee is taking on a lot, and we could use your help. Join WILF and then join our committee. We meet the third Tuesday of every month at 8:30 p.m. Eastern through Zoom. We could do so much more if we had more hands and more heads. So, well, I can't tell you how much it's meant to me. I'm such a groupie of Virginia and Jan and Molly and Jim and Tommy and all of the others that you mentioned, Paul, and these are people who I've heard about forever, but really, and have talked to occasionally over the years, but have really never met.
If I may,
so-
Mary Beth, you're not quite giving yourself enough credit. I mean, when we formed Move to Amend, Mary Beth was the representative for WILF along with Nancy. And I mean, you have been doing this for so long and working so tirelessly and keeping the WILF committee alive. So I just wanted to jump in and make sure you
Thank you, Caitlin.
do.
It has been work, but what keeps me going is the enthusiasm from other folks and this early work that was so brilliant. I want to continue to connect with that work, dust it off, use it, transform it into something that is, you know, social media worthy and catches young people's attention and engages them in ways that we haven't been able to do so far. And hopefully we can do some of that. Let's hope so. Thank you so much, Virginia, Jan, Jim and Tommy, Caitlin and Lisa, and all of the rest of you who helped out tonight, Ricky, the two Ellens, Darian, and Michael for getting the interview with Joel Backen. Thank you all, and good night.
Hi, everybody.
Bye, and thanks
Bye.
very much, Mary Beth.
Bye, Virginia. Nice to hear you.
Yes, great to hear all of you, really. Thanks
Put the
for
John and
joining
Molly
us.
show- Put the John and Molly show back on the road.
Ah! Well, Molly's pretty busy with other
Please.
things.
I'll join you,
Maybe
Okay,
somebody else, younger people.
I know what you
everybody.